And hello, this is the Gestalt Media Book Chat, and today we're going to be talking with me. We're going to be talking about my second novel, Ghost Story, and we will be joined by, there it is, right there.
Yeah.
And we'll be joined by Don Hosmer, who is our book model in residence.
Yeah, yes.
And the chat will be thankfully led by David Boyles, who has a series of questions for, I guess, for me mostly.
Absolutely, yeah, I do. But of course, like I want others to join. I think Elaine Davis may be joining us, any second momentarily. So we'll let people hop in. But yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll be glad to. I've got, being the ex-teacher, I definitely have my list of questions here. So you'll see me looking down to refresh myself about what the questions are going to be. But we are going to do this a little different, a little differently than we've done the other book chats in that, a typical book chat is really a group of people who are all together who've read the book. But since we're online, we're also enticing people to get curious about the book and inviting them in when they haven't read it. So that makes it a little different, especially when it's a book like Ghost Story, which, has a lot of neat surprises in it. And we don't really want to give those spoilers out. So what we're going to do, if possible, is kind of keep our conversation along the lines of things that would be general enough not to be spoilers. But then halfway into it or so, I'll announce that we're getting ready to throw some spoilers out there so that anybody who joins us either now or maybe they'll join us after it's been posted and people can go to Gestalt Media to find it, or on YouTube on the Gestalt Media channel to find it, they'll know to get off too. But in the meantime, if anybody joins us live or they've got questions and so forth, but we'll just kind of keep that in mind that we're going to keep it no spoilers for a while here anyway. But anyway, so I'm glad. This is really an exciting thing, and I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Ghost Story is a really neat book, and a very unique ghost story at that. So I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. In fact, I don't know how many months ago it was, Jason, but we met. I was picking up some books to sign them, and we had a wonderful dinner in Mars Hill, North Carolina. Met there together in between our homes, and I just couldn't help it. I think I just read it, or I had all these questions for you then. And in the midst of everything, we've got other people around. I had to ask you questions about the book then. So we'll do it officially now. I have a few little, teasers that I could already know about. But I was curious in one thing is that, and you've mentioned this before, that in the preface to the book, even you say that it took 10 years to write Ghost Story. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that in some posts today. I wondered if you had finished it earlier, if the book would have been any different. Did things happen over 10 years that might have changed things at all? Or do you think the story was always there? Or just what was it about the 10 years?
Well, the 10 years actually coincided with my father's passing. And I think that was important because if you've read Ghost Story, you know that it is a horror novel. I mean, it is a paranormal kind of novel. There's a lot of ghosts in it. That's the whole point. But it deals with family trauma. Mm-hmm. And it deals with letting go of issues that you grew up with, and just the way that we all come from kind of a screwed up place. And you can't choose who your parents are, really, but you can learn. And I don't think until he passed on, I was ready to write that story. So I think that had a big piece of it. It's dedicated to him, actually. And so I came up with the idea when I was living in the apartment that's featured in the novel, where the whole novel starts at. I was living there, and people who I've talked about before, some really freaky stuff happened in that apartment. It kind of got my mind working on it. But it wasn't until this last year, until late 2018, early 2019, that I knew what I wanted to say. And so I had to give it time. So it would have been vastly different. It wouldn't have been near as deep. A lot of the characters probably wouldn't have been there. I don't think it was ready. Some stories they need time. They gotta germinate a little bit. Mm-hmm. So no, I'm glad it took as long as it did. I'm also glad it's over. That was a marathon if I ever had one, trying to get that thing edited, written, and then edited. It was absolutely
right. So pretty much just percolate in your brain there for a while, and then, or did you have things on paper at even 10 years ago?
I had written down. I knew the cast, so I knew the main character, and I knew the first scene, which gets a lot of discussion. A lot of people have talked about that first scene. And for reference, there's a second novel in the works, and it goes a lot more towards how the first book began.
Okay.
Because the first book is a road trip. It took some turns. It went in some weird places. But that promise that you got in that first book, we're going right back to that. So
okay, that's great. I do have a question about that, so we'll follow up with that in a bit. But I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, another thing was interesting when I was even prepping my questions and typing them out. I can't tell you how many times in my typing when I meant to type, when I was writing Justin, the name for the main character, that I typed Jason instead of Justin.
Yeah.
And so I wondered how much similarities are there between you, the writer, the author, and Justin, the main character?
I think a lot. A lot of the places in the book are places that I've been, and so it was very much inspired by actual life. I wouldn't call it biographical by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the character himself is not me currently, but definitely who I was about 11 years ago when I would have been 10 or 11 years ago when I would have been his age. I was very much like him, and I think I stayed true to that. So I hope he progresses maybe even better than I did as he gets older.
Well, even at that point, do you think there were things that were definitively different between you and Justin? Like, the parts that were just absolutely fictional about that character that, say, well, there are a lot of similarities, but there's still some things that were pretty different too. Or was he just that close to being like you?
A lot of it was dead on. Some of it wasn't. Like, there were parts of his personality that actually annoyed the crap out of me trying to write them, because I knew they were true to him, but I also knew that in that situation, what would I have done differently? And it's kind of like like when you go see a horror movie and you're yelling at the screen.
Yeah.
Like, don't do that.
Yeah.
He does, especially with his encounters with the spirit world. He does some things that I was just like, oh my God. It's like, I know you shouldn't do this. I know this is a mistake, but this is what the character would have done. So I had to venture away from what I thought was common sense or good sense. Because I knew he would have done it differently. Yeah,
well, that makes sense. And I'm going to come back to that again in another little point there but I'll wait. I think that may come. I don't know if that comes in the spoilers or not, but it depends on how I ask the question. But for now, I'll even ask Dawn a question. Like, in your characters and the books that you've written, do you find yourself closely relating to a main character?
No, well, yes and no. I feel like there's a bit of me in each character.
Mm-hmm.
But like Jason said, you also have to add those pieces in that are true to the character, even though it might not be what you would do or what you think makes sense. So I can really resonate with that with Jason, where you're writing those things where you're like, no, don't do this. That's stupid.
Why?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And yeah, I've got those why moments, those questions for Jason too. But I wonder if all of us, when we're writing and we've got anything with any length in it, short stories are a little different. And I write mostly short stories so far. But when I write the novella, for example, if you're writing a main character, you have to be able to relate to them to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
You really, even if there are differences there, but otherwise it would seem like a really hard exercise to just adopt a totally different character that's not like you at all. You got to get into their head.
Yes.
And I wondered about that. But Justin and Jason seem like, although there are things, and like I say, I keep teasing that, and we'll get to that. I've got some questions again without spoiling things at the moment about, when you were probably screaming at the screen and when we're screaming at our books,
Right.
That kind of thing. There are those moments, definitely, for sure. You were mentioning that the story starts out, I don't know if you mentioned specifically, but I will, in Norfolk, a place where you lived and an apartment that you lived in.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if again, you don't mind sharing a little bit how much you're comfortable with about, without spoiling, because we're going to come back to the actual first scene, that very, very, I don't know if I say controversial, but I'd definitely say it's a powerful opening scene to a book.
It gets your attention.
What about, yeah, it gets your attention. That's a good way to put it. What about that? Oh, there's Elaine. Hey, Elaine.
Hey. Sorry it took me forever.
You're there. That's Elaine Davis, everyone. So she's going to join us. Well, about that apartment. Can you tell us a little bit about that apartment?
Yeah.
In Norfolk?
So it turns out it's like, and I'm not, I kind of come from the Tarantino, Stephen King school of fiction writing. It seems like all my stories happen in the same universe. They're very well connected. And this apartment that I had is in the Ghent neighborhood of Norfolk. So it's one of the oldest neighborhoods in the country. And the building that I lived in was built right around 1800, somewhere in there from what I've been able to find out. And honestly, it was my stream. I'll cuss if I want to. It was fucking terrifying. It was a really scary place to live. On the surface, there was nothing weird about it, but just after the one incident after another just kept building up, and it got to where, I mean, I've had this conversation. If I didn't have a lease, there's no way I would have stayed there for a whole year. And if it did nothing, it definitely gave me the inspiration to write something like this. But all my stories tend to come back to that neighborhood, or characters walk me back to that neighborhood. So there's something there. My story in Dark Tides was based in the same place. I don't actually say it, but the character did live in that building as well. And it just seems like there's something about that place that I keep going back to. So Ghost Story was conceived there. It was actually in true horror story fashion, which I don't think this is a horror story. I think this is a paranormal road trip. It's the only way to explain it. It's got those scenes in it, but I don't think horror does it justice. It was actually plotted out on index cards taped to the wall in the living room of that apartment. So it's always been creepy. There's always been some weirdness surrounding this particular.
Do you ever find extra note cards on the wall? Like, I didn't write that.
No, I didn't put that one in there. No, they had enough to say. I always say, the day I came home, about a couple weeks after I had moved in, and the TV was on. And so I got to my door on the second floor, and I could hear a TV going, clearly could hear a TV going. And I was kind of listening. It wasn't any of my neighbors, and I heard it was definitely coming from my apartment. It was the news. I wish I had paid attention and heard what they were saying on the news that time. And when I stuck my key in the lock, it stopped, and it went dead silent. The only problem with that is, as I've told you before, I did not own a TV at the time. So, so things like that were constantly happening, and that was the nicest, tamest thing that ever happened there, up until the point that I said, that's it. I will actually leave everything I own here if I have to stay another night. So like true Amityville style. And I forgot, what was the question?
Well, that was it. That's exactly what we wanted. How did that apartment impact you and influence you, and what role it even played in getting Ghost Story to paper?
It was 100% the inspiration for getting that written. I don't think I ever would have written something like this without having experienced what happened there.
Yeah, that's really neat. And for those folks who want to hear a little bit more about that true story, they can get the audiobook Haunted, right?
They can get the Haunted True Stories of the Paranormal audiobook, which is coming out this year.
Yeah, right. How about that? Just product placement right there. Oh, and Elaine, as you came in, let me share with you, we were going to do one thing a little different with this book chat, in that we're going to try to keep our spoilers till later. And,
okay.
I'll announce when it's time, so people can, leave the chat if they don't want to know those spoilers. We don't want to do that. So we'll keep that in mind with our answers. So we're asking kind of generic things right now and just talking about those. And we may ask you for some of your expertise again, too, because there's a pretty neat thing. In fact, I'll just go ahead and jump to that and go all out of order. With all this great sequence of questions that build upon each other, and then I'll throw it out the window. But
Exactly.
I
All
was
right.
I'm curious. I mean, I am not a sensitive. I don't have any paranormal experiences, only one or two things to work with. So I'm not an authority. I'm the worst authority on that. But it really came across to me reading Ghost Story. It seemed so realistic. I
Oh
thought
my God. Yeah.
the experience that Justin, the main character, how he experiences things seemed very real to me. For this horror, I still think there's a lot of horror there, but this paranormal book. And I wanted Elaine to address that as a sensitive herself. What was your impression like when you read the book, just thinking about things like that?
Well, hopefully I'm not saying anything I'm not supposed to. Uh, but Jason can attest to the fact that I'm pretty sure within the first 3 chapters, I was DMing him and Anna going, okay, which one of you is sensitive? Because it resonated with me specifically.
Yeah.
His, it resonated with me specifically. The way certain things were described, the way certain things happen. It's really hard to
Yeah,
not.
it's hard to do it without giving the spoilers. And we'll free
Yeah.
you up in a little bit to be more specific with that. But I guess what you're saying is it did come across pretty realistically.
Awesome.
Yep.
Mhm.
And all those things as terrifying. And there are some terrifying scenes in there. They feel like they could happen.
Yeah.
Huh.
Totally could.
So that's I think quite a testament there. And Jason, would you consider yourself a sensitive?
If you mean, have I experienced spirits, ghosts, after whatever firsthand? I have, since I was real little. So, I mean, I guess by definition, you pretty much have to put it that way. It's just always been a part of my life, though. Like, it wasn't something that I ever considered to be unusual.
And now my question is answered.
Mhm.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've ever used the term, but I get it fits just as well as anything else. That stuff like this story, I feel like that kind of had a little bearing on who Justin was in the book. That he had grown up with those experiences, and he never really knew how to place them or what to do about them. And maybe a little more family input would have helped in that. And I think that really does parallel some things that happened in my life as well. So,
All right.
yes.
Well, that definitely all makes sense. There's a good bit here, and we may part, and I don't want you to feel like you need to divulge anything about your own personal life that you don't want to. So we can kind of diverge from that path and just talk about Justin as a fictional character here. But there's a really interesting angle about what Justin has to deal with, and he uses alcohol in one ways to kind of give us a buffer, and he's also taking he has drugs that he takes, and is encouraged at times to take them. Like, have you taken your medication? And yet he doesn't want to because the way that makes him feel. And as a teacher who worked with students over the years, there were so many students that I had who were often prescribed different drugs because of maybe hyperactivity or whatever. And it just seemed cruel to me at times that they were often asked to take these drugs that they hated, often just to be able to behave in school. And that was, and there are, I'm sure, looking back on it, many things that we could have done differently and not had to use a drug in order to have that and make somebody feel, especially a child or a young person. I was teaching high school, to feel that way. Was there a deliberate thing, plan on your part as you incorporated that into Justin's character about the drugs and the alcohol, how you worked that in, and why you worked it in?
Well, if you remember, and you've also read Watcher. I do. I have a strong dislike for the pharmaceutical industry, and so everything I write seems to be an undercurrent that appears often. I hate the way we deal with drugs and medications. I hate what they do to people, and I felt like he was really the perfect character to show how he just wanted to be himself. but that was impossible. And the only solution was to give up who he was just so he could fit in with society, just so he could function. And that didn't feel like a fair trade-off.
Right.
And that was his struggle the entire time, is no one would tell him how to actually handle the problems that he had. No one would teach him how to function as himself. They kept trying to make him something else, and it was never going to work. And he just rejected that outright. So there was that battle there. So that was,
I feel like probably you could say that probably spills over to a lot of different people in our society, where we're dependent upon drugs, over prescription drugs, to handle things that maybe we should be handling in other ways. Is that a fair statement?
It's super common. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I certainly can. I know most of the people I know have had a time in their lives where they had to deal with medications and the side effects of medications, which are often worse. So which is worse, Would you rather be sick, or would you rather not be able to function in a whole new way?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I've wondered about that. And again, it ties in beautifully with this story, but I did wonder if there's, like you said, it comes up in more than one of your works. And it seemed, but it's not like you're preaching. It's just something that you think about. And it came across to me very realistically. And so it's kind of cool. I mean, I think if you had set out to go, I'm going to write a book about, it would fail miserably. But when you just work things in naturally to the story, which I don't know how conscious you have to be about that. It seems to me it's just what you do as a writer if you're good at it. And you're obviously good at it. The way that was able to be worked in, I thought worked really well. So, nothing to talk about there. I just said that.
Well, I think, and I think everybody here could agree, the best way to bring, as authors, the best way to bring issues to light is not to grandstand about it. It's our job to just show them as they are. So it's not like I set out, like you said, I didn't set out with the intent of making that the point of the book, but I knew it was a part of his character and I wasn't going to shy away from it. So I'm going to show it exactly as it is, and you draw your own conclusions.
Yeah. Well, I think it happened in Dawn's book with Bits and Pieces. I mean, it was interesting to me that, or not Bits and Pieces, probably there too. There were moments that we could think, and like I asked you questions about the justice system and about counseling and about the failures that some of our institutions have and how frustrating that is. And again, you probably didn't sit down and go, I'm going to write a book about that. You had another story to tell, but if you're telling the story, that's part of it. And to be able to capture that is part of the writer's job. And even when it's, The End of Echoes was not a book necessarily that you think of, here's a nice entertaining book. It was a hard, gripping novel, unlike Bits and Pieces, which probably is more of an entertainment. But even in those kinds of books, and like Ghost Story, there are elements of things about real life and issues that people face that I think make the stories work. And I think horror can do that as well. And it often, people don't think about it that way. But if they're told well, it's all couched in just the real world, even though the monsters may be there. It's really about the human condition. So enough about that. The teacher popped out again. Sorry, we'll put him away. But
let me go back to
the
question you asked earlier, is if we put or see ourselves in our characters. And I think that our truths or things we have experienced are what comes out in the characters. So that, and when you do that genuinely and make that part of who they are, I feel like it comes across as authentic instead of preachy.
Yeah.
So I think Jason in Ghost Story put some of his truths into this book, and therefore it came across authentically and as a good story and not preachy, but yet we could get those takeaways from it. Hey, I wonder how he feels about the pharmaceutical industry. And, it makes us question, what his experience was, because it comes across as so truthful.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. And another thing about Ghost Story that we can all relate to, and again, that it touches every reader, is that you did use one of the most common themes, probably. There are several themes in a book, like in every book, there's more than one theme, but one overriding thing is this was a quest. Mm-hmm. This was a character who was looking for himself. You know, the road trip is always the perfect metaphor for that. And to have a ghost trip, you know, ghost story road trip is even better, in my opinion. This is perfect. But that's really what Justin was about, was this road. I mean, it was a quest for identity. And therefore, I thought it was kind of cool how we could relate to that. So that made a really good structure for the whole book. But to ask a fun question, you provided, in an interesting way, a playlist, a musical playlist for this. And I wanted to hear the story of how that developed, if it was thought out at the beginning, or did it come about later as you were working? And did it evolve over the 10 years? How did the playlist come about?
The playlist came from, big surprise, Norfolk. So when I lived there, I used to have to drive back and forth. I would drive a lot. This was back before gas was $1,000 a gallon, and you could just drive around if you wanted to. And I would often take my cue from my radio. I always felt like that it just seemed to be in tune with, I don't know, probably just making shit up, but it just seemed like it was always in tune with my mood. And it was part of when I was originally brainstorming this novel was, man, wouldn't it be cool if your radio did talk to you? Like if you receive messages that way. And I mean, music's always been a huge part of my life. Like in the 90s, I could go toe to toe with Matt Pinfield and I would probably make him feel stupid. Like it's always been a thing. And so the opportunity to bring that in, let me try and make this sound deep. I feel like music is such a powerful storytelling device. Like you can get any emotion that you want across in 3.5 minutes, and it can be some of the most powerful stuff you've ever heard. So it felt like a way to get the emotion that I wanted to deliver in the story at the right moment. That I'm like, look, the words will get you so far, but listen to this song and it'll put you there. Like whatever you feel when you hear these lyrics, that's what I want you to feel right now. That's what I'm trying to show you. And it worked. And it felt like her character, Whitney's character, which I won't say much about until we do the spoilers. It felt like that's what she wanted. She wanted to say what she couldn't say. And she wanted to communicate in a way that she didn't know how to do. And the natural medium was for her to pick something that was universal. So,
cool.
Yeah, that's how that came about.
That is. So did the song list, did the playlist change over time? Or did it?
I added songs over time. That was part of the percolation period. Was I only had 3 songs that I wanted in the book. The theme, which is the Smokey and the Bandit theme, is the theme for the whole book. Midnight in Montgomery was actually the song that told me it was going to be a ghost story. When I heard that song, I was like, now I know what I'm writing, because it's going to be in here. This scene has got to be in this book. That's how I knew it was going to be a road trip. Because as I got thinking about it, I was like, well, I've got to get them to Montgomery, Alabama somehow. There's only one way I know. They're going to have to drive. So it just built like that. And then right up until I finally wrote the final draft, which was I finished early last year, like January, February of 2019. I was still adding songs to that list.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, in fact, that scene that we talked about, the first scene, is fully inspired by a line in the very first song on that list. So I didn't know how I was going to get that moment across until I heard that song, and there was a line that he said describing the creature in the song, and I was like, I got it. I know exactly what it's got to be. So sometimes that's just where it comes from. That's where the pieces of the story filter in from other parts of your life.
That's cool. So in the movie, what will be the intro music and what will be the outro music?
I think,
Midnight Night in Montgomery. No?
yeah, I think
Starting out.
Megalodon will be the intro music, as it should be. It has the feel that I like. The ending credits, I would think it would be Smokey and the Bandit. I think I laid them out in the order that I'd want them to be in. I'd want it to be that, and then I would probably fall back on Midnight in Montgomery for the latter half, because credits are long as hell.
Yeah, credits gotta go. They go a long time, so yeah. Well, that's great.
Those are the most important, I think.
Well, I asked that only partially facetiously because I think it really is cool how the music works for this particular story. And I don't know that I don't know if that's going to be a tool that you use in other stories, whether you want to do that, but it was definitely important for a road trip book.
Yeah.
Definitely worked really well. Now, there is something like me. I was really glad you had that. And I'm enough of a geek that I'm too old to know everything about it, although this was a really diverse, wide band of music. But I still wanted to go back. I didn't stop reading. I will confess that. I didn't stop reading and go find the song. But on my second reading, when I was looking for something else, I did go back and I went and I did the video links and I could find those and kind of get the feel and realize which ones I knew and which songs I didn't know but really liked and thought that's pretty cool. I like how that worked. So that was really fun. That was kind of a neat extra little treat to have with the book.
If you played them in the background, if you played the songs I list during that chapter, I was probably singing that in my head while I wrote it anyway. So it should flow just right.
That's really good. Have either of the other two, like Dawn and Elaine, have you ever worked with music and had that kind of relationship with what you were writing?
For the End of Echoes, there were two songs that I usually write to silence, but with the End of Echoes, there were two songs that I played over and over and over again because it got me in the headspace of the characters.
Oh, yeah.
But one book I've read, and I think this was such a cool idea by Jodi Picoult. I forget the name of the song, but the main character was a musician. And so in the front of the book, she had a CD of music created specifically for this book. And at the beginning of each chapter, you were supposed to listen to a song and it would set the tone for the chapter. And I just love that device. Like it reminded me a lot of what you did, Jason, but it had the actual music you could listen to. Because it does. It creates the mood. And I tried with Ghost Story to stop and at least listen to a little bit of each song, but I was too wrapped up in the story. I'm like, no, I need to see what happens.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, I can definitely get that. Were you tempted to have a song for every chapter?
Yeah, well, here's what stopped it is, I don't know if everybody knows, but to get the permission to use a song in a book is not free or cheap.
Yeah.
So it was tempting to do, like I wanted to do whole sections. The original Montgomery scene had almost the entire song playing throughout, just interspersed throughout the text, because it's such an important part of that story. It's really the root of that idea. And it just, I mean, I don't make a lot of money as an author. So that got axed. I ended up just using one line. I could get away with using one line of each song very precariously under the Fair Use Act. And I did contact the copyright owners and et cetera. But yeah, I would have had probably 20 songs if it wasn't for legal issues. Yeah,
well, I can relate. It's like when I was telling you about the 13th Day of Christmas, that the original idea for me was every Christmas, all these little lines from Christmas carols, and then ended up ditching that whole thing because of the copyright issue. And, turned out I don't think it matters, but it would have been cool. I can tell you, it would have been cool if you had those lines to just reference at the time when for each story, but that's okay. It all works out in the long run, but I'm glad it worked for you on that. And we'll wait for the soundtrack in the movie. And that'll be cool. Speaking of that, like I say facetiously, that's this is very visual. Again, it would make such a great movie.
Yeah, well, the script has been written, so.
So it's, knock, knock.
Book I read on Kindle, Monsters of Music by Rebecca Kenny, who is in the writing community on Twitter. And it was a Phantom of the Opera retelling, and she had links in the Kindle version.
Nice.
So you could click on this link and it would take you to the song, which I thought was a brilliant idea. So Jason,
cool.
you should add that to your Kindle.
Great. Now I got to edit my Kindle book.
Yeah.
All right. Nothing I love more than dealing with KDP. So, all right.
And that's good. Now I'm going to have to, this is odd, even though I'm the host of this, but I'm going to defer something over to Jason, give him a task. He's going to have to actually work, even though he's supposed to be the interviewee and be the honored guest. Oh, there he goes. Yeah.
Get back here.
But, and my true confession is that last Saturday, I was telling you, I put my glasses in my pocket for, in my involvement in, and I broke my glasses. And so I'm back to these, but I can't read the damn comments on the screen. So if you see some questions of people that are asking things, please just interrupt me and go with a question there, as long as it's not a spoiler yet. But we're getting close to the spoiler, but we're not quite there yet. So folks, we are going to be getting into some of that territory in just a little bit. But about the road trip thing again, it's really interesting geographically where you went. Mm-hmm. And I like that a whole lot, and I really love it. And there are certainly things in my mind that stand out. Key West, New Orleans. Those two places really are places that hit hard for me, and we'll talk about why later. But I wondered if you wouldn't mind explaining why you chose the geographic locations that you did, because you have the whole country to work with. Why did you choose those places?
They're my favorite places. That's the most of it. The places that I took them to were ones that I love dearly, and I wanted to share. What's funny is I have stories in all of those cities that I tried to incorporate into the novel, but I had to take them out. I had to cut them down because they weren't believable.
Wow.
So my actual Key West experience from the first time that I went there, actually my mother grew up there in Key West. My first experience there was so out there that I tried to make that Justin's experience. It very closely walked in his footsteps, except he went directly to his destination, and I spent several hours doing some other stuff that my beta readers and my editor were like, bro, you can't put this in here. A, no one will believe you. And B, it's like 4 chapters worth of stuff. So I cut it down a lot. But Key West was a fun experience for me.
Well, there's a lot in Key West. I mean, so if you cut it down, there would have been a whole lot.
It was wild. It was something else. New Orleans, I've always considered my true home. I've always felt at home there. And he says that, I think, walking down St. Charles, that it felt like home. And it's because I think it does. I think anybody that goes there will have that. It has a draw to it that it doesn't matter if you're a stranger or not. But I truly feel like it's where I belonged. And my grandmother lived across the river in Gretna, which is just across the bridge from New Orleans. And so I have a lot of good childhood memories there as well.
Oh, that's cool. I know Justin, the character, mentions that his grandmother lived in New Orleans. Yeah. And so we're not going there yet. Got another question, but boy, lots of teasers. So you folks that haven't read the book yet, I hope these are hooks, because there's some stuff you got to read. It really is. But okay, so New Orleans, how about after traveling west, and why you chose the location where Justin needed to end up?
Well, I mean, I lived in Phoenix for 3 years. That's where I met. It's not where I met her because we're from Carolina, but it's where I dated my wife, I guess. It's where she lived at the time. So that has a lot of personal draw to me. Actually, my brother lives in Portland, right outside of Portland. He's probably on here watching this. And so I don't know if he was traumatized by how I chose to represent Oregon.
Yeah, let's
But
snicker, snicker.
I didn't know if I was going to write that. All right, I had it penciled on my, and everybody knows that the way I plot a book is like meticulous, and still the last 3 chapters were a question mark. I was like, I don't even know if I can write this. But we did, and so he lives there, and I've been to see him a couple times, and I love the region, I love the people, and that was really all the spots that he visits. And there's some cool ones in the second novel, the sequel, that I think are better. But these were all like my favorite places that I'd ever been to. And when I found the location that he ends up in Portland, in Oregon, is real. It does exist.
Oh, it does.
When I found it on Google search,
That's
never
very
mind.
interesting.
I was like, I got to use it.
Well, that was a question, like why that? But that's in this. We're almost done, folks, with all the regular non-spoiler questions. In fact, you kind of led me to my natural end, I think, here where I was going. Oh, well, I take it back. I do want to address something about, again, kind of going back to the paranormal and psychic ability and that sort of thing, and get Dawn and Elaine in on this question. But I'll ask you first, Jason, because you kind of bring it up. There's a question in my mind about Justin and his involvement with ghosts. And we don't have to get specific about them just yet because this is non-spoiler. But his relationship with ghosts changes. It almost seems like his paranormal contact and his interaction with them grows throughout the story. And there seems to be, to me at least, a couple of reasons. And I wondered if one of mine is totally wrong or if they're both in there. One is obviously that he stops using drugs. So he has more, he's stopping the shield that's keeping him from some of that contact. But there's an interesting premise early on in the book, without it being a spoiler, it's just that if the more Justin interacts with ghosts, the more attention he gives to them, the more interaction there is. And so I wondered if, is there an idea perhaps that the more energy you expend toward them and acknowledgement towards ghosts, that gives them energy and therefore they may even do more? So I'll ask you first, but then I want Elaine and Dawn. I know that your stuff is not necessarily, well, you have paranormal things there too, not so much ghosts, but it's other stuff. But I know Elaine probably has a very definite opinion about this, but I'll start with Jason if that's okay. So Jason, what do you think? Is there, the more you interact, does it give and feed anything there on that side of the veil?
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's okay. So the way a story is written, so you have happened to just hit what you should have. I don't know where everybody gets their ideas from, but I get them from somebody will ask me something. I'll get a little piece of a conversation. I usually get a scene, and I'll start working it, and thinking about it and letting it grow, and doing these little what if things and just seeing how it goes. I had a conversation with a friend of mine before I moved to Norfolk, and they work a lot of Christian groups and stuff like that. And one of the things that she said was that fear controls you because you look at it, and that's what it wants. It wants you to look at it, and its entire purpose is to get you to give it attention. And the more attention you give it, the stronger it gets. And if you can stop giving it that attention, it's like a spotlight. It's like it is terrifying and you can't look away. But if you can stop doing it, that light goes out and it's not there anymore. And it won't bother you anymore. And they had their way of phrasing that. They said it was spirits, the spirits that were interacting in your life that were causing you trouble, or because you were giving them the attention that they crave, and that's what they thrive off of. So that was definitely a seed that began this whole story, was to say that's what they want. So these spirits that he's interacting with, they need that attention. And so without, like you said, without going too far into it, I think we're in spoiler territory here shortly. The more he sees them, the more he accepts that they're real. the more real they become.
Right. Now, is it cool? They'll go to Elaine. Would you like to comment on that and just like what your experience has been and that whole idea of feeding that energy or feeding it? Can it grow?
So I actually think it would be better to go with Dawn first because you guys are familiar with me, right? Mine's just not going to be a short one.
I absolutely think that's true. And that's why I pay no attention to that stuff in real life because I don't want it to grow. My older son used to have like one of those things that, like, in the middle of the night, it could come on if it detected movement or sound. And he would always try to get me to listen to it. And I'm like, I don't want to know. Like, I just want to turn a blind eye to it. So I definitely think what you pay attention to grows, whether that's fear, things from the spiritual, paranormal realm. So therefore, I ignore that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm watching our time and I see where we are just to kind of make us more comfortable with things. And Jason, see if you would go along with this idea. I think when we go along, we talked about the non-spoilers and it basically has gotten close to, will fill our hour. I wonder if we could, if y'all are comfortable, we can talk on, but we might just divide this whole thing into 2 parts. I mean, we might edit it down when it comes time to posting. So maybe we can keep that in the back of our minds and see where we want to go. Because I'm telling you, I've got some more stuff for us to talk about. And I know that I've kept Dawn and Elaine from being able to ask questions that they wanted to ask. So we will just see about that. So we'll play with that idea in just a few minutes. Elaine, we're receptive. We're open. What do you think?
Okay, so I actually agree with what you give attention can grow, but I think that works in both ways, not just with fear, but within good things too. You know, what you put out there comes back to you. In respect to spirits, ghosts, shall we say, I think more so what it boils down to is when people start out their, how do I describe it? You know, they're on the fence, they question, you know, we've talked before about how they'll find ways to excuse what they've seen or find other explanations for what they heard or what they saw out of the corner of their eye. And until something very, very personal, very, very specific to them happens that kind of blows those doors wide open, they'll remain that way. And what happens is that until they actually believe, they're in a state of fear because they're not in control. And I think that more than anything is what contributes to that. I don't think it's so much so that the activity increases because you're giving fear to it and you're feeding off of it. I think honestly, in some cases, they're just trying to get your damn attention. I think when it really comes down to it, when you start believing, and you figure out how to manage your abilities, you put boundaries in place. It's not scary. Are there bad ones? Sure, but there's ways of managing it, and there's not anything to be afraid of. You know, there's ways of protecting yourself, and it doesn't need to be anything to be afraid of. And so I think that when talking about stuff like that, if you're feeling afraid, it's because you're in a place where you haven't yet fully come to terms with how you feel about all of that. I think that is that was all I wanted. That was my point that I wanted to make.
Okay, well, that's cool. That really does make sense. And we do have our question. So this is your brother, Jason?
That's my brother.
Okay, so you got to tell us about this bedroom in the house on Lawson Road.
So I think it kind of goes to everywhere. Everywhere I've lived, I've had these really bizarre experiences. In that one, I was watched, and not the basis for watcher. but in that particular room, there was definitely a figure, just a shadow figure that would appear pretty often. Um, and there was downstairs. There was this feeling of dread that I don't care how tough you are. When I was 15, which I guess is when we lived there, I wasn't afraid of anything. I mean, I was like, I don't care. I mean, nothing in the world could scare me back then. But if I walked but in the hallway between the bedroom and the downstairs level, between the bedroom and the living room down there, terror, just absolute pure terror that comes out of nowhere. And you would literally be chased. I mean, there's no other explanation for it. You felt like you were being chased. So that house was really creepy. But that's something that's actually happened over and over in places that I've lived. I've always, after being there for a little while, these things just start to kind of appear. There was one that's actually kind of cool. I'll keep it short, but I ended up discovering a hidden hole in the wall that had been plastered over because I kept having these drawings, these desires to go look for something, and I could never rest in that particular room where it was. And I was home by myself once, and I was like, okay, what the fuck do you want? Because I got to get some rest. And I just kept getting feels like you're being pulled, like literally feels like you're being pulled. And I got back there, and it's just like right here. And I'm like, there's nothing there. That's where I put my couch, my bed. I had a fold out couch as a bed. I was like, there's nothing there. But it's like, that's why I couldn't sleep, because it was on top of something. And I finally moved it out, and I got close enough to the wall, and I could see just the tiniest little bit of imperfection in the wall. I ended up, I mean, I'm sure we didn't get our deposit back, but I ended up cutting that away. And it was one of those old covers they put where stovepipes went. And somebody had taken a magazine, put it inside of a brown paper bag, and stuffed it into that hole in the wall and hidden it there. I couldn't really get much out of the magazine other than it was from the 50s. Mm-hmm. But those things just keep happening.
Yeah, that's wild. That's wild. And so I think it's safe to say that you did draw on those experiences, if nothing else, the emotional reactions that you had to them and frame of mind as you were writing Ghost Story.
Yep.
If it's not the actual stories, it was still the feeling that went into those, and then just a retelling and borrowing from them maybe freely at times, but still that whole feeling of that.
Yeah, so like Chris says, everybody, and I counted, I had 50 people in that house at one time for an entire summer. Everyone hated that room.
Bad room.
Yeah. It's my bedroom, whatever. But I mean,
so you chose that room.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's incredible. And I think where I am now is ready to say that we can move into spoilers.
Let's do it. Come on.
All right. So we do need to just check kind of a little take care of business here first to make sure, is everybody okay? Has everybody got a little bit of more time to talk about it for a while? And of course, if you have to leave, you have to leave. But is this a cool plan to go ahead and, because I think the discussion is likely to go on, because this is some pretty neat stuff when we start talking about particulars in the book. How is everybody about time?
I've got about 20 minutes.
Okay.
So till like after 20 after.
Okay, that's cool. We'll make sure that you get in there first, because I'm have a wide open question first for y'all to jump in. But I will let everybody know who's either watching live, or if you're watching this and it's recorded, we're going to go into spoilers right now. So here we go. My big spoiler alert question is, what did y'all think about Whitney as a character?
So mad. I was so mad. I was messaging Jason. I'm like, she's dead? Why? He's like, just keep reading. Oh, no.
I think the response was, oh my gosh, that was fast.
Yeah, it's early in there. We had a discussion about that.
In the margins, fuck you. I hate you. You're not a nice person. I was like, oh crap, it's like chapter 3 and I've lost my editor. This is great.
Yeah, yeah. It is chapter 3. We had that discussion about how much we could talk about Whitney. And it turned out we had plenty to talk about in a general sense, but that's a huge element to this story. And I think a really unique way, if I'm not mistaken, a really unique way of telling a story where your co-partner in the story is a ghost.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, have y'all read stories that have that same premise? I haven't.
I've seen it done before.
Okay.
I'm gonna out myself. I read wide. I read everything. So I mean, I read romance, fantasy, erotic, or whatever. I read all of it. There's a series by Stacey Cade, and it's called The Ghost and the Goth. And it's about a goth kid and a dead cheerleader. And I won't say that because I came up with the story before I ever read that, but once I read it, I was like, yeah, this can work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been done, but I hadn't seen it done a lot.
Right. And it's done, I admit. There are other things. I mean, there's even comedies of The Ghost and Mrs. McCabe and all that kind of stuff, or Mrs. Miller or whatever it is, you know, that it's been done. But this was done in a really unique way to me, I think, for Whitney to be who she is and to be involved in the road trip. But it had to create, technically, a lot of problems for you as a writer. Because I found myself thinking about it that way of like, well, how are you going to handle this? And how will it work in this scene? And when you bring these characters in, because you've got to think about who can see her and who cannot see her. And you went a long time before, you know, there's an awareness of like, oh, you know, self-awareness. Yeah. So how hard was that for you? Did you find yourself sometimes almost painting yourself in a corner?
Well, literally, I had her stuck in the booth with the sheriff a couple times.
You and I talked about that scene because and when Justin goes, they go to the little diner, and then Justin ends up discovering, you know, has another little encounter with another spirit. That was a tough scene to write, I would think, because of the logistics.
It was tough all around. That was pretty fucked up.
It's heavy emotionally, but it also, you know.
That's when it was actually in Asheville. They went to I can never Barley's downtown. Great restaurant. Amazing restaurant. Another thing I cut, that was a full chapter of me talking about Barley's, and Rachel, the editor, was like, seriously, stop it. This could just be a paragraph. She's like, it was beautiful, and she'd use it somewhere else. But come on, let's get on with it. He is in public talking to himself a lot. And so there were a lot of times where I had to come up with how I could make him do that and it not be weird. So, and the really difficult part was when the other spirit comes in. So what I've got the diners. He's sitting there talking to somebody that only he can see. This other spirit comes in and they don't interact with each other. They're not acknowledging that either one is real. And then you've got the diners, the trucker sitting at the end of the bar, and he's talking to two different dead people that guy can't see either one. And it had to make sense. Yeah. It had to work. And I'm like, how the hell can I make this work? And I think it did. I think there was some humor involved with it that kind of helped, but it was logistically, it took me a while to get my head around it.
And I think it'll be hard in the movie, which will have to be in the movie. It'll be hard in the movie to do, but it needs to be done because it's really an important thing. I mean, you know, if you wanted to, you could chuck the whole thing out of the story and the storyline, but I don't want you to. I think that for those elements alone, it was such a unique interaction of living and non-living. Really cool. It's really cool.
It has to be there. It really says it set up his character for how much he doesn't want to go through this.
Yeah, that's true. It was so much character development there and helping you understand him as a character, and it definitely helped us as a reader to empathize even more and feel more about Justin. So it worked in that regard too. Other comments that y'all wanted to say about Whitney and this? Oh, here we go. There it is, the diner scene.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what we were just talking about. How he's just trying to be normal, and everybody, they see him as a nut job.
Yeah, yeah. There are those times when it's like, again, this one wasn't a horrible one to be telling Justin, don't even do this. Don't go there. Don't do this. Why are you saying that? I did find myself saying that a lot of times to Justin in my head. It's like, why are you doing this? Even back at the beginning when he has his whole night in in Norfolk, away from his apartment and comes back in to talk to the cops. Talking to the cops was so frustrating. Like, and yet he has a lot going on when he's talking to the cops. And when Whitney first appears, that's a really heavy duty thing to have to deal with. And anyway, I won't go there anymore either. But did y'all have anything else about Whitney specifically that you wanted to say? This whole device of using her that way, and to have, can we say it's a romantic relationship? It's definitely, that's the love interest here. That's a unique love interest.
I'm still mad at you about it because it was his chance to be happy and you killed her. How mean.
Well, I mean, life sucks sometimes.
Good.
I wanted you to know right up front that this was not going to be a fair, lovey-dovey, or a happy story at all. You're not getting that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
At least you would find out at the very end, and then you were like, plot twist.
I think it ended very sweet, but that's just me. So, long distance relationships, they're not the easiest thing in the world.
But Justin having to juggle this through most of the book to keep her from being hurt, from I think he's trying to protect her through most of this, and having to figure it out too, because nobody knows the rules, so I had a very trivial rule, but I just wondered, occasionally, very rarely, Whitney might disappear for hours. She might not be there. Like at one point she goes to take a shower in the motel and he doesn't see her till the next morning. My question was, this is a movie question, so the next morning, is Whitney wearing something different?
He actually points that out, that she did change clothes because to her, it's a new day.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So she presents it as a new day.
Yeah. So she presented herself as if nothing was different. But I think the whole time she knew, but she was trying to figure out what was wrong. Like she knew something wasn't right, but she couldn't figure out what it was until very close to the end either. So she was living her life for whatever it was.
And she zones out. She zones out at times too. Did you have an idea in mind of what's going on when she zones out?
She's just not there. Oh, when she zones out, when she's thinking,
she's still visible. She might be sitting beside him in the car, but she zones out.
Figuring it out. That was her time where she knew something was wrong, but she couldn't figure out why she felt weird or why things didn't add up. And it was, it's kind of like a little PTSD kind of thing. She needed to come around to it when she was ready. And all she knew. So I don't know if this came through, but every spirit in the stories, in the whole series, they're not really themselves anymore. They are the very last want, the strongest desire they had whenever they died.
She does that.
Become that.
She figures that out and says that.
Cool. So her last want was to help him. So that was her entire driving goal for the rest of for her life, her afterlife, is to help him, and this is what he needed help with. So she kind of got in that single-minded focus of that's what she needed to do. But whenever there were those long pauses, she had time to kind of sit and think. And it was starting to become clear that something wasn't right because she was so close to him the entire time. You had that effect of the more energy he gives to something, the more real it becomes. So, and the woman in the bathroom, same thing. He gave it so much energy, it began to piece together what was really happening. Normally, they wouldn't be able to do that. They'd be stuck in their loop. But he's kind of the catalyst to bring them out of that. So he was able to fully bring her out of it to where she knew what had happened.
Would Whitney have gone with him on the road trip if she were alive?
Yeah, I think she would have. But I mean, it obviously would have been a lot different, but she would have been able to express to him more clearly why he needed to do this and what he needed to do. Because of her state, she was only able to guide him into, she knew where he needed to go, but she really didn't know why, because she had her own shit to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been different, but probably would have been a lot more fun.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask that question, and I'm uncomfortable asking that question. If somebody else wants to ask it, jump right in there.
Or you can answer it, Jason.
I fade to black. I'll let you guys figure that one out.
Well, you did kind of fade to black, but it was implied at other times that they're, you know, how much intimacy can this couple have?
They could theoretically do anything they wanted after enough time together, that she would have become a solid, like she would have become human to him. She would have been able to interact with the physical world the same as any other person would have, the same as the one at the beginning of the story did. She was able to lash out. So with enough emotional connection and with enough physical presence, they would have been able to do whatever they want.
So that goes back to my point about the more interaction you have with the spirit, then the more energy perhaps you give it, or else it also is developing. Now, one other kind of physical question about the logistics of how stuff works. It seemed to me that your spirits throughout the book were interesting and unique in some cases. Most of them, I mean, there were traumatic things about all these spirits, but most of them manifested, when they manifested at that last point in their lives in a very physically literal scarred sense.
Right.
Whitney did not.
Right.
What was the, I don't know, rationale, or what was your thinking about why? I mean, I know why you would not want her to be in many cases. It would have been a difficult road trip. But what was going on with you in the development of these differences of those spirits and Whitney, and that why she can appear and be very natural looking?
I think it was her closeness to him that did it. So it was entirely his influence on her that, for one, she was kind of in shock as we go throughout the whole thing. We never show the beginning of these, and we do in the graphic novel that's coming out.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe this year, maybe next year, I don't know. Corona fucks everything up.
Yeah.
I do go into what it's like when the spirit, when they first die, and how they react. She's the only one you've seen from the moment that it happened until she grows into it. These spirits are stuck in their cycle of trying to get out of whatever it is that held them, whatever desire held them here. So I think it would be twofold. One, she hadn't accepted her place yet. So she was in denial, and that showed, because she even denied that it had ever happened.
I see. That makes perfect sense. That's really cool that does, because the others, well, do the others know they're dead?
They begin to realize it, I think. And like I said, the more time they spend with him, if he would just spend time with them, they would know. They would come out of it. But I think that cycle just keeps repeating, and it deepens the wound that they're carrying. If they're stuck in a negative cycle, then they would get stuck with that, which is why the first character is so gory. It's been so long. She's been trapped there for so long. And the homeless guy, same thing. Sparky.
Yeah, Sparky.
Is trapped in his rage to the point that he's now lashing out at anything. So I think their cycle deepens. They become more of whatever they are as time goes on. But I think with her case, she also had to appear whole to help. In order to perform her function, her mission, she had to appear normal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, there's a line here, Dawn will like this one too, because of a particular word that comes up. But like Whitney says to him late in the book, she says, "I think it's like an echo. You're seeing the final desires of these people, lost souls who wanted one thing more than anything else in the world, and they're stuck here trying to get it. They have to live out their purpose at all costs." That's Whitney realizing that and speaking to Justin at that point in time. So you did kind of cue us in, at least at that point. And that was kind of a neat thing. But I thought you kind of skillfully tied it in with Justin's whole road trip of self-discovery. That's his whole quest in the first place. What is his goal? Whether you're alive or dead.
Yeah.
It's like, it seems to me you're suggesting this theme of there's still a mission. There's still something that you're trying to find to do. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, that's his whole thing. They want something, and if he doesn't find what he's looking for, he's going to be the same. He's going to be stuck in this cycle the same as they are. He's never going to get out until he finds his truth. And when he gets that, he gets a large portion of it towards the end of the first book.
Yeah.
He's able to move out of that, and that's kind of where they go their separate ways, because he doesn't need that anymore. He's on to something else. He's on to a new level of growth. And that's why it's called The Road Home as well. Because he's trying to go back. So it's a journey of discovery.
Now, again, on the physical level with different kinds of ghosts, the ghost or spirit, the entity of his father is very different than everybody else. There may be some things that are going to come. I'm sure I feel like that's certain there's going to come later. Are there things that you can say about that now to explain his difference? He comes first as a dark shape, not even really recognizable. That's your first exposure to him. And he gradually becomes more physical in the sense of being able to see what he is. There's a broad brimmed hat. There's a darkness, but there's a decayed corpse feel to him. Can you talk about why he appears the way he does?
Sure can. Hey, Don, I know you only got a few minutes. Did you have any last questions or comments?
Good catch.
No, I just want to hear your answer.
So they all, as we've covered, they all have their overriding single most important goal. His was to protect his son, to keep him from being like his father, to keep him from suffering the same fate. So he always appeared the way he needed to accomplish that goal.
To be frightened.
In the beginning, he was like, I'm going to scare the shit out of him.
Right.
And keep him away. And again, they don't have logic. The spirits don't have the same logic we do. They're very singular. They're very focused. So he was like, stay away. And that's what he had always employed, and it had always worked. And when it didn't work, he had to switch tactics, and he had to learn to come up with another way. And so between their interactions, the emotional connection that they already had, being father and son, and the fact that he was the same way, that it was, spoiler, that it was genetic, he just as Justin began to understand who his father was, he became more human to him. And so it bridged that. And so the fear was gone. That wasn't going to work anymore. That whole facade was destroyed, and he actually got to see what was underneath. And it was terrifying as well, because it was actually, like you said, rotten and dead, like actually spiritually dead. He had lost so much of himself trying to perform his only task, which was to keep his family safe. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It really does. It seems to me there's a real parallel, just in different ways, of what his father was in life, really trying to keep Justin away from what his fate might be, and then he has to do it in death. But it's just different tactics, but there is a parallel to that path. And like you said, a singular purpose, it just takes a different route. So it's a really cool concept. I mean, really neat idea behind all that you certainly don't get. It's just a frightening ghost story at first, but the way that it all comes together in that regard is definitely pretty cool. So definitely have that. So my other question, maybe you can't answer this or not, or may choose not to answer it, but are we going to learn more? Will we see more of Justin's father in book 2?
No
comment.
Book 2 covers his new truth, understanding what he is now and the consequences therein. That's all I'm going to give you.
Okay.
Poor Justin. You're going to be so mean to Justin.
Is it a linear story? I mean, we're going to go back and forth a little bit as we
You're
tell
gonna
this story?
go. It's you're just gonna keep going from where you left off, pretty much.
Oh, okay.
There's a little skip in time, but not a lot.
Cool. That's great. Well, we're going to look forward to that. Well, I do have questions too. Now, we've talked about so many family members and the idea of Justin's mother. She's really an interesting case, and how much she's going to be in there. Justin's grandmother, it seems like she's going to be significant too. I think we just barely touched on her with a lot of questions that obviously we have to come back to.
He's a fun character.
Yeah, she seems like she'll be really fascinating and an interesting character. And the fact that she lived in New Orleans is only going to make it better. But what about Justin's mother?
I hated her, by the way. Hated her. I think I was messaging you that as well. And Anna. I'm like, I hate this woman.
She's special.
Piece of work is what I called her.
She's another situation where I had to tone it back a little bit. From, but yeah, she's a really, really interesting person. She's not done at all.
Okay, she's not done. That was a good question, a big question. Can I ask a physical question that I just had a hard time wrapping my head around, and I went back and reread to make sure? Was she basically dead for 24 hours?
A short period of time.
Only a short. It seemed to me like she died in the pool, but then she wasn't quite dead, and then that's why he was able to revive her.
She was. I would call that near death. So, like, she was out of her body, but her body wasn't dead.
But for many hours, it seemed like if you were looking at a time frame there.
Mm-hmm.
From the being in the pool.
From the time that they got in the fight in the jail, from when he left until they got there, which that's a long ass drive to begin with, but there was still a lot of stuff that still had to go. So she was in there long enough to get really pruny.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So the physical explanation would have been alcohol and drugs?
Overdose, yeah. It was a drug
interaction. So that put it in a unique situation where then everything else could happen in a way, and you have this really interesting possession that takes place for a little bit, and shifting of a lot of things happen right there. And then
so hard to write.
Yeah.
So hard. Oh my God. That was the one that me and Rachel, the editor, we went back and forth. I rewrote the last 5 chapters of that book at least 3 times. She read the first one and she just sent it back. Like, no. Like, you can't end it that way. I was like, fuck. But that's how I want to end it. She's like, hell no. So we wrote it a few times. But that part, you said what a dance it is, getting her to be there but not there, and looking at herself, and the timing, and just it was a nightmare logistically to figure out how that would work.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, it's a device I'm sure somebody's used before. I can't actually recall seeing it, but there was a lot of Google involved with that, and a lot of just like people that I know who are specialists in that to make sure that it was accurate. But I mean, as accurate as we can get. I mean, we don't know anybody who's left their body for 12 hours before.
Yeah. Well, it was cool, and it did allow for such a neat thing. Christopher, you bring up the point of how cool it was for Whitney to come in, and you get this whole interaction, and you realize, oh no, she's not seeing. She sees Whitney, and there's a real good reason why she sees Whitney and doesn't realize it. That's pretty cool.
Because he was thinking that maybe that's where it came from. Was from her. It was from her side of the family.
So that that was a big eye opener ultimately for him as well. So that was a really interesting thing there. That whole development was fascinating. That was a kind of fun scene. I mean, and boy, talk about climactic. I mean, I won't give that spoiler away, but there's still a whole lot physically that's going on right there. This difficulty of writing it sometimes translates to a question I would think as a writer, how about the readability of it and what your reader's getting. And I know that I've gone through this, not nearly as a complex a situation, but you wonder, is my reader getting what I want them to get right here? And I wondered at that point, I had to go back and reread, and I want to know if it's just me being dumb or if other people had the same issue. And it's not a problem. It's just that you go, oh, okay, I'm going to go back and look at that again. When Whitney and Justin stop at the gas station repair, car repair, and there's a dog.
Yeah.
Okay, so it takes till reading the next chapter, I think, as for me as a reader, just like Whitney, to realize, I don't know if Whitney ever realized it, but when we realize, yes, she does, she realizes the dog's not alive.
Yeah.
And so were we supposed to get it, or did you kind of want us to go to the next chapter and go with Whitney, experience that, or should we have picked up on it being the smart readers that we're supposed to be and get it right off the bat?
I don't know, smart readers, did you get it before she did?
I don't think so.
I don't think I did. I had to go back and read again.
I was hoping it was one of those things that you would have to be like, fuck. Like, okay, cool, yeah, I see it. So I was hoping it would be something that would hit you a little bit later. Ideally, the same time that she got it, because it's a double punch there. Because one, you realize for a second what it's like to be him. He doesn't know all the time if it's real.
Yeah, whether it's real or not. Yeah.
And on top of he doesn't know who's real or not, he doesn't know if he's really seeing any of this shit to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Like if this just
wasn't the first time, and again, I had to reread things, and I'm still not even sure, so I may be being stupid again or not. But the homeless guy in the beginning of the story is kind of your first inference that this goes on for him, and he's not sure. That's when Justin's not sure. To me, I thought he wasn't sure. He's dropping coins into a cup, not knowing whether they're going to hit the ground, hit the pavement, or whether they're going to go in a cup. That kind of thing, if I'm remembering it correctly. Yeah. It seems like you've dropped hints all along. This is what Justin goes through.
Yeah, it's a constant thing with him, and he's like, I don't know. He doesn't know if the people he's talking to are real. Only thing he knows is that they've never. Somebody said, "Hey to you, Don." Hi. He doesn't know if they're real. He just knows that they can't talk and they can't interact. They normally couldn't speak to him and they couldn't interact with him. Now that's all blown to shit. So it's pretty rough. But at that moment in the junkyard, I wanted you to be present when she realized that something was wrong. And that's when she first has to face that either she's like he is or she's like the rest of them. Yeah, and she really struggles. That's why she disappears for a little bit. She really struggles with what that means. Right,
and she still doesn't come out with it. She just pushes it back, maybe?
Yeah. Well, now she knows, but now she doesn't want to accept it. But she knows.
Oh, okay. She's not she's not accepting it.
Her character switches to a more motherly mode. Now she realizes that she's really got to take care of him, and she gets frustrated with him for being stupid all the time.
Yeah,
but she's
like we did, like all these things in Key West and in New Orleans. Well, New Orleans, Key West was the main one. Is like, bro, don't, why are you doing this? And
what the hell? What the hell?
Just go back to, because I realized there wouldn't be a story. Some really important stuff has to happen, but you're saying, no, go with her. Go back to the hotel. You don't need yet another drink.
Yeah, I mean, and he had a really bad day.
Yeah, he did.
So I'm not mad at him, but I was like, bro, bad plan. He's like, no, all right, one more. I'm like, no, don't be that guy. Just go home.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That was Key West was mainly where but I love the Key West scene and I love the New Orleans scenes. They were, I don't know that I can say favorite parts, but I have many favorite parts, but they're definitely in my favorite parts. I love being there. I felt like I could experience it there. I felt like I was there. Even though I've never been to New Orleans, I've been to Key West, but only as a child. So it's a whole different scene. So it's changed so much, but it gave me a real feel. I like when books can take me to places and I do feel like I'm there. So that was happening, and that was really cool. Is that the cat?
Probably.
Luke is always got to be the hog, he's got to get in the action here.
He was in on the book chat. He has things to say. Yeah. Okay, guys, I'm going to duck out.
Okay, Dawn. All right. Well,
It's perfect.
There it is. There's the book.
All
Guys,
right.
everybody needs to grab it and certainly reread it. But yeah, that's cool. Thanks, Dawn.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
We'll wrap it up, but because there isn't a whole lot more that I have, and maybe Elaine's got some stuff too. But I just thought, I mean, there really were some neat things. I just really like that being in those locales. Yeah, I didn't know it's Oregon, right? Where in Oregon is this clothing optional condo?
It's hell, it's outside of Portland. It's actually pretty central.
Because I wanted to say, why is he going there? Except that it makes his mother very unique as a character, and that was kind of interesting. But I was curious as to why you went that route. You said because it exists.
For that, yeah, the place is called Mountaindale, that it's actually based on. And I was trying to remember exactly where it is. I think it's just literally right outside of Portland. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really not far from there. And that character, just to really give you who she was and why she's so fucked up and why he's so fucked up, there's only one way to do that. And I think it added a lot. Hopefully it added a lot to the story. It definitely made you think. But
it seemed like we were all lucky. We were all lucky and relieved, but she could have come to the door without a robe.
She could have.
It was all a little moment of tension there. It's like,
It was stupid awkward. Yeah. And once again, you had Whitney realizing, she's like, hell.
Yeah. When she gets through the gates and start, he says there's no cameras or something like that. She said, boy, really strict. And then she sees why. That was pretty, I like the humor in that. I thought that was pretty much fun there. Well, yeah, you have, okay, my other question, I guess, leads us into the perfect place to kind of start to phase out as we look at it, because I always like to ask questions about the future, and we have addressed this already. Christopher says, public nudity, not a big deal in Portland. Yeah, they have naked bike rides through the city.
Yeah. Asheville's the same way. We do the Free the Nipple parade every August, I think, and it's just something that happens around here. We don't really consider it a big deal.
That's right. The bike ride could be uncomfortable, it seems like, but
it seems like it would. Yeah, a lot of wet naps.
Who knows where that goes? But I was curious about where we're going. I mean, there's so many options and so many stories yet to tell. We've basically got Justin's story. I mean, he's just barely begun to figure out what his journey is now.
Yeah, now all he knows is, he's going home. That's the whole point of this entire series. So it's a trilogy, I'll tell you that. It's a trilogy, and then there's some more that may come after. If you were paying attention, I won't even have to tell you where they're going to come from, but I'm hoping to do at least 6 books in this series.
Well, there's his story, and then it seems like we end up having lots of other possible stories. I mean, these characters that he's interacted with, these spirits that he's interacted with, they all have stories. Are they stories that you're going to tell?
We are telling them in the graphic novel.
Yeah. Okay.
So the comic, graphic novel, comic, or whatever, is the stories of all the dead people that he encounters and how they got that way. I thought that would be really cool to delve into their histories, because they all have unique stories to tell. The woman at the hotel is one of my favorites.
Yeah, she's
looking for her son.
Right.
That one's a really powerful one. I really love that one. The first character, the woman in the shower, her name's Vanessa. I love that story. I can't wait to tell that one. And Sparky from New Orleans, I really can't wait to get around to either. So we are going to tell all their stories. Justin is just getting started.
He's just getting started, right?
He knows what he is, but he doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't know how to deal with it yet. So he's got a long way to go before he figures out before he finishes his mission, I think.
Yeah, it does seem that way. His mother, got the photograph, and he gets a little information, but it seems like that's it. Now he's kind of on his own, knowing a little bit.
He's gonna wish he was on his own.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, his father has given us many clues about,
Yeah.
trying to protect him and that things are happening. Well, to me, okay, one last thing. Whitney, it seemed to me, had, as much as she wanted to help, she too was torn in how to help him. Do you feed this? I mean, is there like, you got to go for it? This is the thing you've got to do. But at the same time, it's like, well, the more you interact, the more energy you're giving them, and the more shit you're going to stir up. Was she kind of torn, or did she have a very clear mission? I know her mission is to help him. I think that's the overriding thing.
That's the problem. Is her mission is to do whatever's best for him.
And it's hard to know what's best.
These decisions, she's got to follow how, like when he makes the ultimate decision. So when he decides to go to Phoenix, he decided to go to New Orleans. She's like, don't do that.
Yes.
That's a mistake. But if you're going to do it, then she's going to be there to help him to get through it. So she was very reactionary in the beginning because of that.
But he needs to do it. And he realizes he needs to do it, even though he may say, oh, I really screwed up. I shouldn't have done that. But he kind of has to do it. He was thinking he needed to train himself because he'd been shielding himself all his life. So he felt like, I need to have this interaction with these spirits, even though it might be a bad idea. And she's saying, do you have to do it in New Orleans, the most haunted city in the United States, which is beautiful. And he said, well, you're going to do it, right? I love all of that. I love all of that. But I see the interesting thing is that Whitney, even though she's got a clear mission, it's still nebulous. There's still questions about how to help. Or I think at least that's the way it came across to me. And I think that's the multi-layers that life hands us. Nothing is that simple. Even in death, apparently, it may not always be that simple.
No, you don't get a free ride no matter what
no matter what. Well, that is really cool. Well, I'm going to kind of like, Lane, would you want to jump in with anything? Because I've wrapped up pretty much what I wanted to ask, although there's tons of stuff there. And if somebody hasn't read this book and they stayed with us through this, I still think you'd be intrigued, even with all the spoilers. You should definitely read this book.
Absolutely. I actually don't have any other questions because everything I had on my little note, we've already covered.
Oh, cool.
It's funny how that happens every time.
Every time.
We got to let you start talking first.
That's right. We always take Elaine's questions.
My husband's sitting over here going, mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, no, but you have such an interesting angle to add to all those things too, so that's really cool. Well, listen, that was a lot of fun. This is a really fun book, and there's so much to look forward to. I know that you got like a million projects at once, so like how these stories get told and when you have time to tell them is the big dilemma. But life, it will happen. It will happen, but we're definitely looking forward to it. So I'm glad that Ghost Story exists. I definitely want to see it as a movie some point. I really do want to see it as well. I think that would be really cool. So anyway, thanks for that. Anything else that you have? But otherwise, I'll let you kind of wrap us up and take us out.
First off, thanks to the people who stuck with us through an hour and a half. That's amazing. I know a lot of people showed up, so thanks for that. I mean, that's why we tell stories, to share them with people. So when you guys show up with Elaine, such a huge fan of ours, makes this all worth it. It really does.
I'm not a stalker.
Not a stalker.
Like, you're the best kind. You just stalk our books, and that's great. That's what we want. So that means the world to me, because these stories, I tell these stories to share something that I felt was worthy with the world. And when you guys enjoyed it, it's the most amazing feeling. That being said, if you haven't read the book, Amazon, gestalt-media.com. Shut up. He's always got to get involved.
The last word.
Go pick it up. I hope the second one will be out next year, is what I'm shooting for. I would love it to be this year, but honestly, it's not. I don't know if that's going to happen. But I had a lot of fun writing it. Hope you guys had as much fun reading it. There is a movie. I mean, you can't say these things are going to happen, but I've had some good feedback. I've had some fairly important people read a treatment. You never know what's going to happen, but that is kind of in the works. The comics coming out, that to be able to tell this story in that medium means a lot to me for tons of different reasons. And I definitely hope you'll pick that up, because it's a whole new way to look at this shit. And I'm going to shut the hell up, to be honest with you. That's all I got.
Well, that's cool. Well, good. Well, who knows where we're going next? We'll see how things go. Like you said, Corona kind of screws everything up with everybody's schedules, but we'll just see next. Dawn's got a book, and I've got a collection of stories that's coming out July 1 with Tales from the Hearse. So we want to, we'll probably have a chance at some point, maybe closer to Halloween when it's appropriate to do ghost stories and that kind of thing. But we'll just see where it takes us. But anyway, well, thanks for everybody who joined us, and so long.
All right.